But why would a crew take off without powering up properly? It seems an absurd idea. The riddle can't be solved by examining the engines. They are still at the bottom of the Potomac River. And Flight 90 was fitted with a pre-digital flight recorder, which didn't monitor thrust levels. There's only one option left. The investigators scrutinized the low-level engine sounds picked up by the cockpit voice recorder. Using a technique called sound spectrum analysis, they translate these sound frequencies into thrust readings.
Yeah, it's 1.7.
That's too low.
The results are a shock. Both engines were running at a thrust level, or EPR, of 1.7. But the 737's takeoff EPR should be 2.04. The team are baffled. It looks as if the pilots took off without sufficient power.
My God, look at that. That don't look right, does it?
But how could this happen?
Shoulder harness. On. Air conditioning back. Off. Starboard pressure. Up.
The investigators play the cockpit recording again and again, looking for clues. Then they pick up on a tiny detail.
Pitot heat. On. Anti-ice. Off. APU. Running.
Can we hear that again?
Shoulder harness.
The investigators are dumbfounded.
He said off.
Shoulder harness.
The recording is poor, but Captain Wheaton seems to say off when asked about the engine anti-ice system.
Anti-ice. Off.
Hendricks realizes one small word could unlock the mystery behind the disaster. He knows thrust readings for each engine are produced by two sensors, one in the inlet and one in the outlet. Together, they produce thrust readings by measuring the ratio between air pressure at the front and the back of the engine. But if the engine anti-ice system is off, snow and slush could freeze up the inlet sensors. On some other 737s, this has caused the sensors to send pilots faulty thrust readings, readings higher than the actual thrust produced by the engines. If this happened to Flight 90, the crew could, unwittingly, have taken off with insufficient thrust. This could be the final piece of the jigsaw. But Hendricks needs to prove it. He asks Boeing to carry out tests, confirming the effect of inlet sensors blocked by ice or snow. The results are dramatic. The engine quickly creates an EPR reading of 2.04. But in reality, it's running at an EPR of 1.7, exactly the same weaker thrust level revealed by the sound spectrum analysis of Flight 90's engines. This could explain First Officer Pettit's confusion.
No, that's not right. Maybe it is.
His EPR dial says 2.04, but his throttle position and his readings for exhaust heat and fuel flow reflect the lower EPR of 1.7.
I don't know.
But how could the pilots make the appalling error of forgetting to turn on their engine anti-ice system? And why didn't they abort takeoff when they realized something was wrong?
Once the roll started with these observations by the first officer, that takeoff should have been rejected.
The investigators study the pilot's records and discover that neither had much flying experience. Also reveals something even more disturbing. Over the last 2 years, Captain Wheaton has had to retake 2 routine proficiency tests after receiving poor scores. His weak areas included adherence to regulations, checklist usage, and knowledge of aircraft systems. The revelation adds weight to the theory that pilot error played a key role in the disaster. But there are still 2 major pieces of evidence missing. Flight 90's engines. Without examining them, The team can't prove beyond doubt that the anti-ice system was off, or that the crash wasn't caused by an engine failure. Then, salvage squads lift the battered engines from the river. 13 days after the disaster, they're rushed to manufacturers Pratt & Whitney for examination. What investigators discover next rocks the aviation world by revealing why Flight 90 was doomed, even before it took off. Technicians strip the engines down and painstakingly search for any sign of a mechanical problem. But they find nothing. Then they inspect the anti-ice system. One by one, they check the tubes which carry hot air to key areas of the engine. The results are decisive. The valves inside are closed. The anti-ice system hadn't been switched on. January 13th, 1982. A series of factors combined to encourage snow and ice to build up on Flight 90. The aircraft is sprayed with half the recommended amount of de-icing agent. Further delays allow more snow to gather on the 737. And the use of reverse thrust may have sprayed slush onto the wings and critical thrust sensors. 23 minutes to disaster.
Electrical.
Wheaton and Pettit leave their engine anti-ice system off. As a result, thrust sensors in both engines freeze up, causing them to send misleadingly high readings to the cockpit. 14 minutes to disaster. The pilots notice a thick layer of snow on both wings.
I mean, this one's got about a quarter to half an inch of snow on it all the way down.
But contrary to regulations, they don't turn back for more de-icing. 1 minute and 3 seconds to disaster. Pettit is confused by unusual readings on the flight deck.
Oh, God, look at that. Right, does it?
But his captain does not abort takeoff. 24 seconds to disaster. Flight 90 takes off with dials indicating thrust of 2.04 EPR. But because critical thrust sensors are frozen, the real thrust is only 1.7 EPR. At the same time, ice and snow clinging to the wings disrupt airflow dramatically, reducing lift. This changes the aerodynamics of the 737, causing the nose to pitch up sharply. The resulting drag reduces speed, which in turn reduces lift even further. 8 seconds to disaster. The loss of lift reaches a critical point. At an altitude of just 352 feet, the 46-ton aircraft stalls and falls out of the sky. 4:01 p.m. Flight 90 hits the 14th Street Bridge. The disaster claims 78 lives, including those killed on the bridge. After his recovery, survivor Joe Stiley left his executive job to work for himself. He's overwhelmed by emotion during a rare return to the scene of the crash.
I think more than anything else, I'm appreciating the 24 years I've lived since then. Like, I saw my kids grow up. I held my dad's hand when he passed away. I could have missed all that.
Following the disaster, aviation authorities issue a series of directives to radically improve all aircraft de-icing procedures. They include measures to make sure thrust sensors don't become blocked by ice. The changes make flying safer for every aircraft that takes off in winter weather.